Hello, everyone. My name is Carmen Mazzara. I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. Welcome to day 3 of our PISA training workshop. We're so glad to see some familiar, I would say faces, but it's mostly Zoom boxes, as well as some new names on our list. We're really delighted to have you here as part of our whole week of APSIA and PISA trainings and workshops. In particular, I want to welcome you all to the PISA community of advisors that we're building across the country to really foster a sense of champions on campuses for public and international service. I especially want to thank my team in the APSIA family who's managed to pull all of these elements together, especially Baung Gong Chur and Brianna Suarez, as well as the Robertson Foundation, who makes these kinds of activities possible. We hope you have been able to join us for other sessions this week, but if you missed Monday's event on careers in public and international service, or yesterday's event on comparing degrees in this space, all of those recordings will join this one or are up already on our YouTube page. So we look forward to having you visit us there so you can reconnect with the content if you happen to miss it. We have another great session later today that's just an open share for you all to get to know each other a little bit and share your expertise and best practices. And then on Friday, we hope you'll come on out. The APSIA team will be there to talk a little bit more about what PISA is, what APSIA is, and what we can do for you as advisors. So with that, I'm excited. Really, this is one of my favorite workshops that we do, my favorite sessions for this panel. And you have a stellar set of experts here. And so I'm delighted to turn the floor over to Tamara Wixon, who is an advisor at RIT, to take the floor. So Tammy, please.
Hello, welcome. I'm glad you're joining us. I am just going to go over a few ground rules just to get everybody started. First of all, we are getting some expert advice today on what organizations are looking for when our students apply to them, and hopefully getting some hands-on or some great feedback that we can use to then advise our students well on how to prepare their materials and the kinds of experiences that we want them to seek to be best prepared. All of our wonderful speakers, their bios can be found in the materials that were shared in the chat, and I'll make sure that we get that in there as we get started as well. Please turn on your camera if you can. Seeing faces makes this a little bit more like being in a real place and all together, and be sure to mute your mic. And as we go, I know questions are going to pop up that you are thinking of, so please be sure to put those in the chat. We're going to give our presenters a few minutes just to kind of answer some questions, and we've got some set things to ask, but then we want to leave plenty of time for all of the questions that you have come to be asked, and hopefully get some great answers for you to help you start preparing to better serve your students. So to get started, I'm going to give each of our panelists a chance just to briefly introduce themselves and their organization, and then we'll dive into questions. And Mark, you're right to my right, so I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Tammy. Hi, everyone. I'm Marc St. Hilaire. It's great to be with you all here. I like to say it's nice to come back to familiar territory. I'm currently the executive recruiter for the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond and the national IT component of the Federal Reserve as well. But I come to this work as a higher education professional. Spent many years in similar roles as all of you, in fellowship advising, career services work, and so I'm excited to present to you all today. Thank you.
Sonja, why don't you go next?
Hi, folks. It's great to see all of you today. Thanks for having me. My name is Sonja Steinbrech, and I am the Director of Admissions Degree Program Enrollment at UC San Diego's School of Global Policy and Strategy. I've been in graduate admissions for a little over 15 years here in California, in Washington, D.C., and then also in Italy. So I've had the opportunity to work with lots of different kinds of grad students, specifically in the fields of public policy and international affairs. So I'm really excited that you guys are interested in this field and interested in kind of opening your students to the idea of going further on and studying public policy, public affairs, and international affairs.
I think that leaves Natalie.
Thanks so much, Tammy. My name is Natalie Spencer. I work as the assistant manager for outreach and selection on the Critical Language Scholarship Program, the CLS program. So I've been with that program for a little over 6 years now. And I know I see some of our advisors for the CLS program in our participant list today. So it's really great to see some familiar faces and some that are familiar with the program, but we're fully funded study abroad language summer program funded through the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. So I'll kind of be speaking today through that lens of those nationally competed opportunities, fellowship opportunities. And yeah, I oversee everything outreach and recruitment related, the application, the selection process for our award, and really happy to be here today.
Thank you, all of you. So I have a handful of questions to kind of get the conversation started, and then we'll leave time again for the questions at the end. And if the conversation goes organically into another direction, we'll kind of just follow it. So to get started, what skills should advisors recommend students make their best efforts to get while they're undergrads so that they're competitive for your school or your program or your organization? Anybody want to jump in first?
I'll start. Thank you, Tammy. Well, I would say the first thing is to encourage students to, number one, get actual work experience, but particularly anything that's of a customer engagement sort of dynamic. I think a lot of times students will come in and say, oh, well, I only worked retail or I only worked in the service industry. But in a lot of cases, those are the types of roles in one's career that really can propel them into other areas. But I think the idea of really encouraging students to get more customer-facing experiences can really help them in whether they are applying for early career jobs or whether it's even fellowship programs. Because at least at the level that I recruit at, which is the senior executive level, in many of those cases, those individuals are being hired because of their ability to manage relationships and really take into account that sort of customer focus.
Natalie or Sonja, anything else you would want to add?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think from a hiring standpoint, I also do a lot of hiring in my position at American Council for International Education. So from a hiring standpoint, I definitely agree with everything that Marc has put out there. I think through the lens of those nationally competed awards, from my end, I think it's less about looking for a specific skill among students and more just looking to see that they have an invested interest, that they're interested in things, and that they have something that's helping them kind of craft their narrative around what they want to do. So really taking that time to articulate their goals from a pretty early point, and with the understanding that everyone's goals are allowed to change, and that some of us, when I was a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior in undergraduate, as a working professional, I don't know what I want to do with the rest of my life every day, but encouraging students to take some time to have articulated goals rather than any one specific skill set when I'm looking at applications, at least.
In terms of graduate, graduate programs, particularly I think in these fields, we think a lot about leadership and we think a lot about service. And so I think that's something to kind of help your students consider and also kind of flesh out ways where they can display that on an application, on a resume, but also, ways that they can pursue experiences that will allow them to have some form of leadership and some form of service. And, we are well aware that the financial situation of many students today is that they can't take off for a year and do a volunteer experience in Guatemala or something like that. But there are lots of ways that we can kind of think about helping these students get those experiences and display those experiences in a statement of purpose or in a resume, if it's in their community, their church community or their, neighborhood community or on their campuses, or even in places, if they are going out and they're getting that customer service experience, if they're working part-time or even full-time at Starbucks, how are they leading? How are they serving? How are they kind of thinking about those traits in their daily lives, in the work that they're doing, in the volunteer experience, and in the communities that they're involved in?
I really appreciate that all of you kind of mentioned those lower level kind of jobs that a lot of our students do just to get by, because a lot of my students at least dismiss that experience, and they don't see it as relevant to their future, that I just scoop ice cream or I just serve coffee. And I think that for a lot of students, those are necessities for their lives that they need to cover their living expenses while they're a student. They need that income that comes in. Besides that kind of work, what other things do you think advisors and encouraging students to be able to articulate the meaningful skills that they gain from that work? What other things could advisors do to support students' development in terms of getting those people skills and also in helping them maybe get experiences that may seem inaccessible, but would really help them stand out as applicants for your programs?
I can go first on that one. I think you hit the nail on the head, really, Tammy, in terms of helping them to rethink and conceptualize these experiences that they're having in and outside of the classroom, particularly those that they're where they're working, to try to help them frame that in a way that's relevant to fellowship organizations or employers or graduate schools, because so much of it is just is framing, right, is understanding and helping them extract experiences and things that they've learned from these positions that will then resonate with folks in our kinds of positions. But I think there's also very, very tangible experiences that maybe students don't always think about, and for international affairs and public policy in particular, really stand out for us. And those kinds of experiences would be teaching English abroad, AmeriCorps, Peace Corps, for example. Those are kind of those very recognizable spaces that are paid experiences. They allow students to get tremendous work experience. They can go abroad, they get leadership experience. These are organizations that are very recognizable, particularly in this field, that I think are very worthwhile to help your students explore if they indicate that they have any interest in those service spaces. And like I said, they're paid, so it becomes a lot easier and a lot, a lot more realistic for them to do those things post-graduation.
Another thing I would add to it is encouraging your students to also be mindful of what they're doing on a volunteer basis. I know when I was on your guys' side of the house, a lot of times a student would completely dismiss what they were doing on a voluntary capacity because they thought it had to focus on something specific to this fellowship program, or it had to be narrowly focused to their major. And I always encourage students to really talk about some of the things they're doing in a voluntary capacity, because very often, if a student is fortunate enough to have the time to do something on a voluntary capacity, and a lot of my students didn't have the time, I often found that what they were doing for volunteer work was sometimes even more related to their passions than what they were doing on a day-to-day basis, whether it be for work or whether it be for academic enrichment. So I would also say is to really take that extra step to say, okay, well, what are the things that you're doing on a voluntary capacity? Because sometimes those are the things that can really make for a really interesting applicant and really opens up the conversation in a way that it wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Mark and Sonja have said. I think I'm in a unique place here because the program that I work on, I think, is one of those opportunities that can stand out in applications for later things. The CLS program is open to first semester college students to apply for. So it is often the first thing that students are applying for in their college career. And it can open a lot of those doors. And so we think about it in terms of how we can help students tell that story. And we do think about things like learning outcomes when we're building our application, and we are trying to put tools in there to help students tell their stories and to help them figure out what is going to make them stand out and how to talk about building resilience and how to talk about contributing to a group-based program and things like this that hopefully will help them articulate those things for other opportunities in the future. So I think encouraging students from very early on in their college careers to go for those opportunities and to apply for things, because even if they are not selected for those types of awards, going through the process of applying for a nationally competed award can teach a student a lot about themselves and can help them become better at articulating that story over time and at figuring out what does make them stand out.
Natalie, I really appreciate you adding that, just because even if you don't get those opportunities, you have those application materials prepared that are pretty much that you could modify to apply for other things. And I don't think students always think about that. I think you all have touched on a lot of really, really great ways to think about transferable skills in many different ways. If a student was considering quantity over quality, if a student only really has the time to do one really good thing that they think will make them stand out versus being an active student, doing lots of study abroad, doing lots of different things, what would you recommend?
It's hard to say, because I think it's really going to depend on the student. For instance, there are some students where they do a lot of things. They are everywhere, where you ask yourself, all right, are you even sleeping at night? But if it's all related to a particular thing, so for example, if a student is involved in something related to international education, they volunteer with exchange students, they work in their study abroad office, they are involved in the critical language scholarship, that's okay. Then that quantity makes sense because it's all pointing in a direction and it's showing a commitment. But you may have another student where it's like, okay, they're only doing one thing, but they are getting so deep into that one thing that they do that equally shows a level of commitment as well. So I don't think it's a one or the other. I think it really depends on the student. Now, I think if you have a student, for example, who's involved in 10,000 things and none of them really show any kind of trajectory, then that's when you might say, okay, maybe you may want to narrow it a little bit versus vice versa. I think if someone is only doing one thing, but you can clearly see that they're not particularly passionate about it, or they seem quite bored, then vice versa, then you may want to encourage them to be a little bit more expansive in the things that they're involved in. But I've never particularly seen an issue with quality over quantity, because I think for each student, it's really going to depend.
And I think in my world, it's a bit of a different answer from our end. Again, we're working with like different students at different points in their academic careers and with different goals. But for that competitive fellowship piece, I think we really, we actually have it limited on our application where students can only put, I can't remember if it's down to 3 or if it's still at 5, the number of like extracurricular awards and opportunities and work experience that they can even list on our application, because we don't want it to become a place for students to just demonstrate how many activities they've had the privilege of participating in. And so we really do want them to kind of narrow down what is meaningful and what contributes to their goals, and to not disadvantage students who might only have 2 or 3 things to put there because they have been working a part-time job to support themselves. And because all of the great skills that can come from that we spoke on earlier, we don't want to disadvantage those students. So we definitely have tried to make it more about quality in our application process specifically. We also similarly, the example I see frequently is like students who think it's really impressive that they've studied 6 different languages and think that they'll have a great chance on a program like the CLS program because they've taken 1 semester of 6 different things, where to us that can come across as like they're collecting languages. They're just in the field like I speak a little this, that, and we're looking for deep invested long-term interest in one thing. And so to Marc's point, really making sure that there's some sort of connection of those opportunities as well and what they're choosing to highlight in an application for a specific opportunity is really important, that they're thinking about what kind of story that tells, whether it's specific in terms of the focus of the activity or the skills that they've gained from participation in that activity.
Sonja, anything different?
No, I completely agree with what you're saying. I guess just one thing I would add from the graduate admissions perspective, because I know that you all serve domestic US students and international students. And so I think one space where I see the US students doing very well is putting together these resumes that do demonstrate kind of what Marc illustrated of, this comprehensive kind of commitment to a couple of things and a trajectory of where you're going and kind of what you're doing. From international applicants, a little less so that are coming from US undergraduate programs, but I feel like we tend to at times get kind of a formulaic resume of I'm checking all of the boxes of I play the violin, I speak 2 languages, I've traveled to 5 countries, I have taken calculus, I've taken world history. It's sort of this, I've checked all of the boxes kind of beautiful resume that unfortunately we receive hundreds of that resume. And so I think that, really, going back to, like I said, what Marc mentioned is just, having that demonstration of the uniqueness of that individual and not to be afraid to shine in that uniqueness and what you are interested in and what you are passionate about, and that you don't have to do everything. You just have to do a few things and, try to do them as best as you can.
Sonja, I think you hit on a really interesting point, because I do find that our students who grew up in the US, and went to US high school, they've been well trained on how to build a resume and build experiences and so on. I find with my international students, sometimes I have to talk a little bit more about, well, it's more than just being a student. You do need some other experiences to share when you're applying for anything, pretty much, and so that does come up pretty frequently for myself as an advisor. So I appreciate you pointing that out, and just how do we get that out there to students.
I would also add not being afraid to challenge the students, and when students say, well, I want to do this, not being afraid to ask that question, well, why? Well, because I want to do, because doing this will enable me to do X, Y, and Z. And then to sometimes almost push them and say, okay, well, so what? I mean, because I always found that when you do ask that simple question of why this, or that so what question, it does take them aback, but it does really encourage them to think about, okay, well, am I doing this because I truly believe, or am I doing this to just check a box? And I think that's certainly something that, from a recruiter standpoint, at the end of the day, we're looking for authenticity. I don't want to see that you've done 10,000 activities just because you think it's going to make you look good, versus, okay, no, you did 10,000 things because these 10,000 things really encompass what you're all about and what you want to be known for.
Absolutely. So we've tapped on kind of what to build up. I'm actually going to skip around to a next question. We've talked a lot about tangible traits, but also there's a lot of intangible traits that are sometimes a little bit more difficult for students to quantify in application materials. Things like resilience, persuasion, leadership, and emotional intelligence. How do you like to see these traits explained in an application, and what typically stands out for you?
At the risk of giving a controversial answer, adversity, to be honest. I mean, not to say that everything has to be a dramatic display, but I think through examples where a student has had to deal with a challenging situation or a challenging relationship to accomplish a particular thing. That's something that oftentimes I would encourage students that I work with, and even now when I'm coaching candidates on going through an interview process, is to really show, okay, whether you've had to navigate a particularly challenging dynamic, or talking about an example of where they really had to be adaptable to a situation that was ever evolving. I think those are oftentimes the intangibles that stand out in many of the programs and initiatives that I'm certainly involved in recruiting for.
Natalie or Sonja, anything else? I see Sonja nodding, so it sounds like that resonated.
Yeah, I'm nodding too. I think, yeah, I think that's well put, Mark, and I would agree with that.
All right.
Okay, and I agree with Mark. I think not only diversity, but also that they move forward to kind of express what they bring to the initiative in terms of current skills and how they see as being aspirants, what they can bring to the table to enable them to enhance their portfolios as a part of the experience that they are applying for. I'm with Morgan State University, and I deal with the global health initiatives and programs in terms of internship, preceptorship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And most of the time, Mark, I will ask the question, why? And it's amazing, you know, you get this long pause and then start thinking, oh, yeah, there must be a reason I really want to do this. Because sometimes they don't, they're just applying to be applying. Okay, so I thought I interject that in.
Dr. Terry, I agree wholeheartedly. We run into a lot of students who are just seeing things and not putting a lot of thought and time into, well, if I get this, what does it mean? What's the next step? So that they're using their time effectively as well as their organizations that they're working with. Anne asked a really good question in the chat, actually related to the helping students explain how to deal with adversity and those intangibles. How is that shown best in an application for you all? Is it better for them to tell it or show it in some way?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm curious to hear what others think, but I think the answers to that should always be to show and not tell. You can say all day long that I'm this, I'm this adjective, and this adjective, I'm resilient, but what does that mean and what story can you put around it to demonstrate that? And then the one thing that I wanted to add kind of to this as follow-up, and in addition to the last question, is for awards like CLS, for nationally competed awards, it's often not the foundation or the organization or the funder that is reading those applications. It's advisors. And so following your own instincts in what you're telling students to do in that arena, you are the ones that are selecting participants in this case. And so if you have the opportunity to sign up to be a volunteer evaluator for something like CLS or the Gilman program or some of these other nationally competed awards out there, you really do get a sense once you've read a stack of 20 or 50 applications of what starts to stand out and what starts to just sound like the same thing over and over again. And we put the word resilience in our application questions, and we put, adaptability and flexibility. So if you're just parroting back our questions to us, it's not very helpful. We really do want you to show us what that means to you and do some self-reflection to tell an authentic story. I think Mark really hit on authenticity earlier, and that is a big part of these application processes, that students will stand out if it is their story. And I think they focus so much on what they think we want to hear versus what really is their true and authentic story that will lead them to the best opportunities for them. But I think you really do get an idea of what stands out once you've read. It's just like reading job applications. If you read 100 applications for a job, you really start to see what stands out and what does not. If you read a bunch of fellowship applications, you really start to see what stands out and what doesn't. So we're always looking, that's my plug. We're always looking for advisors who are interested in reading for us. And it is really just a great way to quickly see great examples of how students are capable of putting these traits into a fantastic story.
Fantastic. Any other thoughts for you all? Well, I'm going to offer up one more question then, and then we'll open it up to the chat. So if you guys want to start putting, if our audience members want to start putting some things in the chat, that would be helpful. So over the past several years, due to the pandemic, a lot of our students have been doing virtual experiences. How do you regard those? And do they count in the same way? And in what ways should they describe them or frame them for you? Should it be framed differently than it would be if it was an in-person experience?
I think if you asked that question 2.5, 3 years ago, I would say you'd have to articulate it differently. But now that for a lot of us, I know certainly my organization, I mean, everybody's been remote for the last 2.5 years, that now it's much there's not as much distinction between the in-person and the virtual. In fact, it's quite the opposite. My organization now, we're having to almost relearn what it is to be in person with each other. Funny thing, my organization recently, we were in a meeting and people literally were awkward around each other. It's like they really did not know how to engage with each other in person versus virtual. Oh my God, everybody was family. And so I think how you articulate that, I think the key is to show what the depth of engagement was on the virtual. So for example, if students were doing a virtual internship or some type of virtual job, okay, well, what did the day-to-day look like? Were you literally just sitting there taking notes and going on YouTube while you're listening in, or were you actually part of the meeting like this one, facilitating, discussing, presenting, sharing, doing a lot of screen shares and really showing? I think that's how you make a virtual experience count, is to show, okay, well, what's the level of engagement? Is it passive or was it quite active engagement over the platform? And what types of platforms you're using?
I would almost push the question a little bit further and saying, is it even necessary for students to put on their resume that it was virtual?
Okay.
You know, we've been here for 2.5, 3 years doing this, and people are doing, or, you know, internships with APSIA, with the UN, with, you know, Tesla, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not a career advisor, so I don't know the answer to this question, but I kind of, that would be my curiosity is it necessary to say that this was a virtual internship? If you're stating what you did, and if you're, you know, demonstrating some of your activities were online or they weren't online, I mean, what is it, are we not being transparent if we don't say, if we leave out this was a virtual internship? I don't know if anyone has any opinions on that.
I think, for example, I'm working with 5 students from China and 5 students from the United States, and they're doing comparative research in relationship to post-COVID reform initiatives in both countries. And it's just amazing what is going on. And I mean, they're absolutely engaged. They're going beyond that. They're beginning to look at what's happening, how it relates to the 2030 plans of various countries, not only the 2 countries that they're reviewing, but they're also doing is that engagement part, I think, comes from the supervisory person having the capability to be persuasive and say to them that this is going to lead to many opportunities in the future, that you can review your life history in applying for any application and demonstrating that you can be a visionary and that you can be a futurist, and understanding the ability to seek what is happening in a challenging arena right now, such as the pandemic.
I would imagine for a lot of us, even being able to toggle between in-person and virtual is probably going to be a skill set that's going to be required in most workplaces from here on out. I know I get, as an advisor, I get some interesting comments from students sometimes that even the transition back to in-person has been more challenging to them than virtual was. So I'd be curious to see if you guys have seen that when you are doing interviews with students, if they struggle a little bit more with those interpersonal skills.
I think that just briefly from the admission standpoint, we do a lot of interviews for admission to the grad program, and I'd say it's maybe partially pandemic fueled, but partially just this kind of world that we live in that is social media and gaming and kind of having half of a life behind a screen. And so I'd like to say that it was just coronavirus that kind of compromised our social skills, but I think that it might be somewhat broader and something that we really do have to think about and focus on for this next generation coming up is how to be with people and how to have an interaction that isn't on the computer, and to just reiterate to these young folks coming up that that's still important. Like that is still a very valuable skill, to be with people, I think Marc, said this at the very beginning, is, managing people and relationships and overcoming adversity in those spaces, that personal interaction is still, one of the, as you all know, I'm sure better than I do, one of the most valuable things that someone who's coming to a job application or to a grad school application can really demonstrate is, do you, and it's a much, and in all fairness, it can be very, very challenging for some of our students who just are not comfortable in that environment. But I don't think that I can overstate that that's a valuable thing, just being able to be with people.
Well, and I think it goes back to like the first question of our hour, which is like some of that other work experience. So maybe they have these really impressive virtual internships with, government agency or an international internship, but working, at the local Starbucks or working in retail at Macy's or whatever, that they're getting more of those interpersonal skills. And so it would be important to kind of layer that through an application to show that they are kind of trying to exercise both ends of that. And back to the original point of whether or not it's even necessary to say that it's a virtual experience. The one, I agree with what's been said on that topic. The one difference I would make is if it's this, I think we're entering this phase of trying to define what counts as virtual study abroad, and whether that's still study abroad, and those international exchange experiences. And I do think that a virtual experience is just different in nature than being immersed in a host community, and some different, both can be very impressive, but the way that you talk about those experiences might be very different. It might be awkward if someone's asking you about how your time was studying abroad in France when you have never actually been to France. So those kinds of experiences might be the one exception where putting in some way that it was virtual is going to be pretty different. But I think overall, I like all of Marc's points about the level of engagement and being really clear about that. They can be really fantastic experiences.
So Tara has a really great question in the chat. I find many students I work with are concerned about the inability to travel due to COVID-19, whether it's study abroad, work abroad, intern abroad. In what ways might you suggest that students increase their intercultural competence without travel? And I would even couch this a little bit more that sometimes students just can't find the time and money to coincide to allow them to travel. So what are other experiences that you all see value that still shows that intercultural competence?
Well, I think, and again, there are obviously different geographic realities you have to take into account, but I think if a student is from or is going to school in an area that has a very rich international diaspora, for example. Certainly being involved with a particular diaspora community domestically, that can count towards building those intercultural competencies. If a student is working in a particular industry that has a large quote unquote international population, whatever that population might be, being able to show how they've really had to use those intercultural skills because they're working with colleagues that are from X, Y, and Z parts of the world. The other piece, and I think this is something there was a question earlier around what kind of intangible traits. There's something to be said for intellectual curiosity. There's something to be said for really showing how, okay, I couldn't go abroad. However, here's everything I'm doing to try to build those intercultural skills and to really learn about the cultures I'm interested in. Whether it be something as simple as, hey, I have read everything I can. I have followed every YouTube channel I can on this particular part of the world. Really being able to show, here's everything I'm doing, that really the only thing left is for me to actually go to the country. I've often found that that's helpful in building some of those intercultural skills.
Well, one of the things that have been employed is to have what we call a circle of learning portion of the experiential learning process, where on a Saturday or Sunday, we have individuals that will come in and talk about and give cultural presentations in reference to what the students are learning through this experimental applied, let's say, comparative research process. And particularly when I do the projects in Africa, where we have individuals who are actually not only members of the diaspora to give a presentation on cultural issues and concerns, but also some of the individuals coming in under the UN that's actively involved. We have them to come in and give a 10, 15, 20, or 30-minute presentation on the cultural aspects of the subject matter at hand. So there are ways and I'm not technologically swift at all. So I have to give credit to individuals who helped me on this. And going into the 8th decade, I find that to have been very, very interesting, very engaging. Sometimes we'll ask them, what topics do you want to hear about? And then we identify an individual to come in. And it's amazing the attendance, again, outside of what they're doing directly for the research that they have in reference to the circle of learning sessions. And that came up by one of the students, by the way, circle of learning. So that's fine. And that particular person also have taken the lead role to identify speakers. For example, if the research is looking at agriculture, then they'll come in and talk about what's going on with something called GeoAd in a particular country and how it's helping the students in that country to look at becoming entrepreneurs in an agricultural perspective. So that's a unique way of doing it.
Dr. Terry, I think you just touched on a good example of a student who maybe created their own experience and did that and shared it with other people that would probably stand out on an application to explain that to enhance learning on a research project, I coordinated this educational experience that other students were also able to do by researching, local individuals. I think that's those are the kind. And you all could chime in, but I feel like those are the kinds of things you all are often looking for. Getting lots of nods.
Yeah, I mean, I think students do come thinking that they are at some deficit because they have not had those international opportunities, whether it's because of COVID over the past 2 years or other circumstances outside of COVID. And I definitely think that for all students, showing that kind of innovation and creativity and how you're approaching your own intercultural learning is in some cases even more impressive than being able to say, you know, I had the income. My parents took me on vacation to Europe every summer when I was in high school or whatever. That isn't creative or that interesting, really. But if you're really passionately pursuing this interest in all of these other ways, there is a lot of learning there. And I think over the past 2 years, more experiences have opened up virtually. There is a lot out there that you can do from home to be engaged in intercultural learning. So yeah, I encourage students to be creative in that.
So Kelly has this question. I am curious about what folks think about timing of pursuing graduate work. So many students talk with me about working first, but so many get spooked about what is coming next and decide to go just a year or two out of their undergrad. And I know from some of my trainings already with APSIA that there's some graduate programs that are actually looking for students to have a couple years of work experience prior to being considered. So to jump back into her question, what are your feelings on how much time a student needs to build their knowledge, relationships, and credibility? And what do you all think about timing of work versus graduate work?
I can jump in first on that one. Yeah, I think always, having a little bit of work experience does help to bring things into focus for students. I know many of them are just keen to get the schooling part out of the way and then kind of move on to the career afterward. We have about 25% of our students who are coming to our program directly out of undergraduate. They tend to be more academically accomplished students. So they're kind of that 3.6 and up GPA, lots of out of the classroom experiences. And, they get admitted and they do well in the classroom and they get out and they get jobs and they do just fine for the most part, right? But I think that, for the student, it becomes a much richer experience if they come to the classroom having been out for a little while. And, if that's in a very, I guess, I don't want to say relevant, but I want to say in an area that I guess closely ties to the field that they want to study, even better. But if it's, just being out and working, you went out and you built rock walls for a year, and that was overcoming an incredible amount of adversity. And you decided that, in the 10 hours a day that, and I'm saying this because I read an application recently that had, this guy did this, he went and he built walls with his dad for a year and really kind of helped clarify some of what he wanted to do and what he did not want to do. And, then he went off and he did AmeriCorps for a couple years and then eventually kind of found his way back to grad school. And those kind of experiences, really that kind of helps demonstrate, you're a person who, so many things, you can overcome adversity. You're not afraid to take risks. You've kind of thought about this and you have some focus in where you're going. And that's not only good for the student, it's good for us. And it adds a lot more diversity of perspectives in the classroom. Someone's been out and doing different things and they have more of a, just a different way of looking at what they're doing in the classroom. And, more and more I get students who are calling me who are fellowship recipients, and they kind of say, hey, I unexpectedly got this opportunity in my job, and there's this project I've been working on. I've been working for 2 years and there's this great opportunity, but I don't want to lose the fellowship. What should I do? Should I pursue this opportunity or should I defer my admission and, possibly lose a fellowship for next year? And, I'm getting, and I love these questions because it's like these people are passionate about what they're doing. They've got this project and they truly are like, developing themselves outside of the classroom, and they're going to bring, and almost inevitably, I say, you are a tremendous applicant already. Staying in this position for one more year and following a project that you're committed to is only going to make you a stronger applicant. So that's my very long answer to your short question. I think that if they are so inclined, that's something to definitely be encouraged.
I would add to that. Absolutely. I think taking time to really work, get experience, see the world is more advantageous as an applicant. But the one caveat I would add to that is that if there are any types of standardized testing, or whether it's GMAT or GRE, whatever, get those done early. I would say to your students, encourage them to do all of that while they still are students. And I'll use my own example as a case study. I waited years before I went to graduate school. I probably waited about 6 or 7 years after undergrad before I went back. And to be honest, the only reason I even went to graduate school was because my test scores were going to expire. And so I said, I need to hurry up and apply because I do not want to do this over again. And so what I would say is really encourage them to do a lot of the administrative stuff early, because for most programs, the scores are good for 5 years. And in that period, they will have built the work experience. But I do think it's important that they do the testing early, because while they are still actively students, it's much easier to take those kinds of exams when you're actively studying than when I did it, let's say, where I was already working and I said, oh man, I got to go to a night class for this GRE. So I would just say, get the administrative stuff out of the way faster.
I would also just add from my own personal experience that positions in this field, it's just going to be really hard for students who go straight from undergraduate into graduate school to get the position they want right out of graduate school. They're going to have to go in as entry level. They're going to have a lower salary than they want because they don't have the work experience. And it's just really hard to hire somebody above entry level who might have, a fantastic practical master's degree, but doesn't have work experience, whether even if it's in, and that's where we do want to see people highlight their retail experience, any other work experience, but it's really hard to hire someone for a mid-level office job that has never worked in an office environment before. So just from what they're hoping for outside of a degree like this, if they are trying to get a certain level of a position that requires a master's degree, they're not going to get that walking out of their master's degree if they don't have any relevant work experience.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing that helping our students understand that they need the experience is important beyond just the education, more than anything. There are some wonderful other comments and resources that folks have put into the chat. Carmen, I believe this is being recorded and everybody who participates is going to get a recording. So I definitely recommend going back into it. Just to chime in on the one thing of another resource is I send a lot of our students to our refugee resettlement program that works locally, just because they're always needing help and it's such a good cultural experience for students, and there's no cost to the student besides their travel to and from to help. So that's something that can definitely assist, but there's wonderful resources shared here. Want to thank all of our panelists, because you have all provided some really wonderful insights on the things that you see and that you see help students be strong candidates. I know for myself, hearing about that you're often looking for readers for some of your applications, that seems like a really great way to get an inside edge on what makes applications stand out for students. So as an advisor, that might be something I see myself seeking out as for professional development on my own. But I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank all of you for being here, and please check out the program for the rest of the week. And I know there's some other great programs coming up from APSIA as well. So please take advantage of it. And thank you all for for helping us learn a little bit more today.
Folks, before you go, I'm going to ask my colleague to activate a super quick poll to let us know how we did. And as Tammy said, we'll hope you'll come back in about an hour. There's such great chat going on. We don't want to lose that momentum. Take a break, have some coffee, shoot a Red Bull, whatever you need to do, and come on back. This is going to be your chance to share your hard questions and your good answers with each other as well. So please don't forget to come on back then. But in the meantime, super quick poll to let us know how we did. And I want to add my thanks to everyone else's for such a wonderful conversation. We'll have this up on YouTube and you can just watch it over and over and soak in all the wisdom from Natalie and Marc and Sonja and Tammy. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.